"Don't throw me out. I can warm your bed," pleaded the Apache woman, but the rancher warmed her heart. The air had started to cool, carrying with it a crispness that reminded travelers that the night would soon be cold. Malia, an Apache woman, walked slowly along the rough, dusty path that led toward the edge of a remote ranch. Each step she took was heavy, and the ache in her feet made her wince. She had been walking for days, sometimes through open desert under the blazing sun, sometimes along narrow, rocky paths that made her legs tremble with exhaustion. Her clothes were thin and torn in several places, and her hair, long and dark, was tangled with dust and stray twigs. Malia's stomach growled weakly. She had not eaten properly for more than a day. The last place she had stayed had offered only a small meal, barely enough to fill her empty stomach. And the last town she had passed through had looked at her with suspicion, their eyes wary of her wandering, lone presence. She had been met with closed doors and hardened faces, each one leaving her feeling more and more invisible in a world that seemed too vast and unkind. Still, she pressed on. Somewhere out there, she told herself, there would be a place where she could find shelter, warmth, and perhaps even a glimpse of kindness. As the shadows grew longer, Malia saw the outline of a ranch in the distance. It was simple but solid, a structure made of wood with a small stone chimney rising from one corner. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carried by the gentle wind. The sight of it gave her a spark of hope. She had learned long ago that hope was fragile, yet it was all she had to keep moving. Each step toward that distant building felt like a small victory against the despair that often threatened to weigh her down. When she reached the edge of the ranch, she hesitated. The wooden fence was old and weathered, and the gate creaked faintly as she pushed it open. She felt the chill of the evening brush against her skin, and a shiver ran down her spine. Taking a deep breath, she walked up the path that led to the front door. Her hands shook slightly, partly from the cold and partly from nervousness. She had learned that the world was full of people who would turn strangers away, people who could be harsh and unwelcoming. But she also knew that sometimes courage meant taking a risk, even when the outcome was uncertain. Malia lifted her hand and knocked softly on the door. "Please," she whispered under her breath, almost as if the wind itself could hear her plea. She waited, listening intently. The ranch was quiet at first, save for the distant sound of cattle and the occasional rustle of the wind through the dry grass. She knocked again, a little louder this time, and then took a step back. The door opened slowly, revealing a man whose face was rugged and lined from years spent under the harsh sun. His hair was a mix of brown and gray, and his eyes were cautious, sharp, as though he had learned to measure every visitor before deciding whether to trust them. This was Thomas, the rancher. He looked at Malia carefully, noting her worn clothing, her tired posture, and the faint trace of dust on her skin. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice calm but cautious. Malia's voice trembled as she spoke. "Please don't throw me out," she said, her words barely above a whisper. I can warm your bed." The unusual plea hung in the cool evening air. Thomas blinked in surprise. He had expected someone asking for food or work, maybe even shelter, but never a request worded quite like this. For a moment, he studied her face, trying to understand the mix of desperation and hope reflected in her dark eyes. There was something honest and unpretentious about her, something that made it difficult to simply turn her away. He stepped aside slowly and gestured toward the small porch. "Come in," he said, his voice softer now, still cautious but with a hint of curiosity. Malia's relief was immediate. She stepped inside, careful not to let her tiredness show too obviously, though every muscle in her body ached. The warmth of the ranch hit her like a gentle wave, and for the first time in many days, she felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. She could hear the faint crackle of a fire somewhere inside, and the smell of baked bread and roasting meat made her stomach tighten in both hunger and hope. Thomas led her into a modest kitchen. It was simple, but clean and orderly. A small wooden table sat near the window, with a few chairs arranged neatly around it. A fire burned softly in the fireplace, casting a warm glow that filled the room with light and heat. "Sit," Thomas said, pointing to one of the chairs. "You must be cold and hungry." Malia lowered herself into the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt awkward, unsure of how to act. She had spent so long being on her own that the concept of someone offering her food and shelter without question felt almost unreal. She looked around the room, taking in the simple but welcoming surroundings, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel a small sense of safety. Thomas busied himself in the kitchen, setting a plate of bread, cheese, and roasted meat in front of her. Malia's eyes widened slightly. She had not eaten a proper meal in days, and the smell alone made her mouth water. She took a small bite, savoring the flavor and warmth. As she ate, she felt the tension in her body slowly ease. The exhaustion and fear that had been her constant companions for so long began to fade, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of comfort. Finally, after she had eaten, Thomas spoke again. "You've been traveling far, haven't you?" he asked. His tone was gentle, and Malia felt a strange sense of ease in his presence. She nodded, unsure how much to reveal. The story of her journey was long and filled with pain, but there was something in Thomas's eyes that made her believe he would listen without judgment. "My tribe, we were forced to leave our land," she began, her voice quiet but steady. "Families were separated, homes destroyed, and I had no one to turn to. I've been walking, trying to find a place to rest, a place where I might belong." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she looked down at her hands. The vulnerability in her voice touched Thomas. He had known hardship himself, the kind that left marks on both body and heart, and he understood the courage it took for someone to speak so openly. Thomas nodded slowly, considering her words. "You're safe here tonight," he said finally. "You can rest." Malia's relief was palpable. She had expected at best a bed in a corner or a simple cot, but Thomas was offering her warmth and shelter without hesitation. For the first time in a long while, she felt as though she could breathe. That night, as Malia settled into the spare room Thomas had prepared for her, she realized how much she had missed something as simple as safety. The bed was modest, with clean sheets and a thick blanket that smelled faintly of lavender. She lay down, feeling the warmth seep into her bones. For hours, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, the long days of walking, the nights spent shivering under the open sky, the moments when she had doubted whether she would survive. And now, finally, she felt a sense of peace, fragile but real. As she drifted toward sleep, she reflected on the kindness of the man who had opened his door to her. Thomas had offered more than just food and a bed. He had offered her dignity, respect, and a chance to feel human again after days of uncertainty and fear. Malia understood that the world was not always cruel, that even in the harshest of deserts, there could be warmth and compassion waiting for those brave enough to seek it. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the fire crackled softly in the hearth. Malia's eyes closed, and for the first time in many nights she felt safe. She had come seeking shelter, but she realized that perhaps she had also found the first spark of hope, a glimmer that life could be kinder than it often seemed. And as she drifted into a deep, restful sleep, she could not help but feel that this unexpected encounter at the edge of a remote ranch was the beginning of something meaningful. A chance for both her and the rancher to discover warmth, trust, and perhaps even friendship in the unlikeliest of places. The morning light seeped gently through the small window of the spare room, brushing Malia's face with soft golden rays. She stirred, blinking slowly, the warmth of the bed still comforting her weary body. For the first time in days, she felt fully rested. The chill of the Arizona nights, which had haunted her every step, had been replaced by the gentle heat radiating from the small fireplace in the ranch's kitchen. Melia stretched her arms and allowed herself a quiet smile. Last night's kindness had given her more than just a place to sleep. It had given her hope. As she rose, she noticed the quiet rhythm of the ranch awakening around her. A few birds chirped outside, and the distant lowing of cattle echoed through the cool morning air. Melia moved carefully, not wanting to disturb the peaceful atmosphere, and tiptoed toward the door. She knew she needed to show gratitude for the shelter and warmth she had been offered. Her mind wandered briefly to the unusual plea she had made the previous night. "I can warm your bed." It had sounded desperate and awkward, but it had worked. Now, she was determined to prove that she could be more than a guest. She could be helpful, perhaps even welcome. Downstairs, Thomas was already busy. He was chopping firewood near the kitchen door, his movements steady and deliberate. The rhythm of his work was familiar to him, a ritual he had performed countless times in solitude. When he noticed Melia descending the stairs, he paused briefly, offering a small, cautious smile. "Good morning," he said. "Did you sleep well?" Melia nodded, her dark eyes meeting his. "Yes, very well, thank you," she replied softly. Her voice carried a quiet strength, tempered by the gentleness that seemed to radiate from her. Thomas studied her carefully. There was a resilience in her posture, a quiet determination in her eyes, and something unspoken that made him feel as though she had endured hardships far beyond what most people could imagine. "Breakfast will be ready soon," Thomas said. He moved to the stove, stirring a pot of porridge while the aroma of cooking eggs and baked bread filled the kitchen. "You're welcome to help yourself to whatever you like." Melia nodded again and took a moment to observe the space she now occupied. It was simple, clean, and orderly, reflecting Thomas's careful and practical nature. There were signs of a life lived quietly but with purpose. A well-used workbench in the corner, shelves lined with jars of preserves, and a small stack of neatly folded blankets. After breakfast, Thomas suggested that Melia help with small chores around the ranch. She hesitated at first, unsure how her presence would be received beyond the confines of the kitchen. Yet he seemed patient, offering guidance rather than instructions, and his calm manner put her at ease. She started by helping feed the chickens and collecting fresh eggs. Her hands, though tired from long days of travel, moved quickly and efficiently. She felt a quiet satisfaction in the work, knowing she was contributing in a tangible way. As the morning sun climbed higher, Melia moved on to other tasks. She helped Thomas mend a section of the fence that had been damaged by recent winds. Her hands, calloused from years of travel and survival, handled the tools with surprising skill. Thomas watched her quietly, impressed by her competence. It was clear that she was not only hardworking but also intelligent and resourceful, someone who could adapt quickly to new challenges. During a brief rest by the water trough, Melia and Thomas spoke more about their lives. Melia shared pieces of her story, speaking softly but with honesty. She told him about her family, the Apache community she had grown up in, and the events that had led her to wander alone in the desert. Her voice carried a mixture of sadness and strength, a reflection of the many trials she had faced. Thomas listened attentively, never interrupting, never judging. He realized that her story, though filled with hardship, was also one of courage and resilience. "You've faced a lot," Thomas said finally, his voice low but sincere. "Yet here you are, still moving forward." Melia smiled faintly, a mixture of gratitude and quiet pride in her expression. "I had no choice," she said simply. "I had to keep going." There was nowhere else to turn. As the day progressed, Melia began to feel a growing sense of belonging. She tended the garden, watering vegetables and herbs with care, and even shared knowledge of plants she had learned from her tribe. Thomas watched as she identified plants he had barely noticed and suggested ways to use them for cooking or medicine. He marveled at her understanding of the land, impressed by the way she seemed to connect with it naturally. The ranch, which had felt quiet and lonely before her arrival, now seemed alive with energy and purpose. By mid-afternoon, the sun had climbed high in the sky, and the heat of the day began to settle into a gentle warmth. Melia paused for a moment, leaning against the wooden fence and taking in the view of the rolling hills and distant mountains. She felt a sense of peace she had not experienced in months. The world outside had been harsh and unrelenting, but here she could breathe. She could rest. She could exist without constantly fearing what tomorrow might bring. Thomas joined her at the fence, handing her a cool drink of water. "You've been helping a lot today," he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I wasn't sure what to expect when I let you stay, but this feels right. It feels like you belong here." Melia's heart lifted at his words. She had feared being an intruder, someone who might be tolerated but never truly accepted. Yet Thomas's acceptance felt genuine, as if he had recognized her not only as a person in need, but as someone with worth and value. The late afternoon was filled with more work, repairing a broken wheel on the cart, checking the fences for weak spots, and gathering firewood for the coming nights. Melia moved with a quiet efficiency, her actions deliberate and careful. Thomas observed her, realizing that she had brought more than just help. She had brought life, energy, and a sense of purpose that he had not realized the ranch needed. As evening approached, the sky turned a deep shade of purple, and the first stars began to twinkle above the desert horizon. Thomas and Melia sat together near the fireplace, the warm glow casting long shadows across the room. Dinner had been simple, but the conversation that followed was rich and meaningful. They spoke of the land, of the seasons, and of the challenges that came with living in such a remote place. Melia's laughter, soft and genuine, filled the space, bringing a warmth that went beyond the fire itself. That night, as Melia prepared to sleep, she reflected on the day. She had come to the ranch seeking shelter, unsure of what would happen, and yet she had found so much more. She had found trust, acceptance, and a connection that felt rare in a world often filled with suspicion and fear. Thomas had offered her a place to stay, but in return, she had given him companionship, help, and a presence that brightened the ranch in ways neither of them had expected. Lying in bed, Melia thought about the journey that had brought her here. The desert had been harsh and unforgiving, yet it had also taught her resilience and courage. Every hardship she had faced had prepared her for this moment, an unexpected encounter that had blossomed into a fragile but promising relationship. She realized that the world could be harsh, but it could also be kind, if only one had the courage to seek out that kindness. Outside, the wind whispered gently through the trees, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and desert sage. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, a comforting sound that reminded Melia of safety and warmth. She closed her eyes, feeling the fatigue of the day settle into her bones. Yet amid the exhaustion, there was a quiet joy, a sense of belonging and purpose that she had not felt in a long time. And so, in the quiet of the evening, two lives that had once been separate began to intertwine. Melia, the weary traveler seeking shelter, had found a place where she could rest, heal, and belong. Thomas, the solitary rancher, had discovered a presence that brought warmth, laughter, and companionship into his quiet life. Together, they began to forge a connection built on trust, respect, and the small but meaningful acts of daily life. As night deepened, Melia drifted into a deep sleep, her mind filled with thoughts of the day and the small victories it had brought. She had been welcomed not just into a home, but into a space where her presence mattered. She had been given the gift of acceptance, and in return, she had offered her skills, her strength, and her unwavering spirit. For both of them, the day had been transformative, marking the beginning of a relationship that would grow, deepen, and endure long beyond this one evening. Days turned into weeks, and life on the ranch began to settle into a new rhythm. Malia, who had arrived as a weary traveler seeking shelter, was no longer just a guest. She had become an essential part of the ranch. Her presence was gentle yet strong, quiet yet noticeable in every corner of the property. Each day brought small but meaningful contributions from her hands, feeding the animals, mending fences, tending the garden, and even helping Thomas in ways he had never imagined. Her work was steady, thoughtful, and purposeful, and with each passing day, the ranch began to feel warmer, brighter, and more alive. Thomas watched her quietly as she moved from task to task. At first, he had been cautious, unsure whether to fully trust this woman who had appeared at his doorstep so unexpectedly. But her actions, her kindness, and her resilience spoke louder than words. He noticed the care with which she handled the animals, the patience she showed when fixing broken tools, and the attention she paid to even the smallest details of the ranch. She seemed to have an instinctive understanding of the land, the animals, and the rhythms of daily life. It was as though she belonged here, and slowly, Thomas realized that her presence had begun to fill a space in his life he hadn't even realized was empty. One morning, Malia awoke to the soft call of a lark outside the window. The sun was rising over the distant hills, casting long shadows across the fields. She stretched and went downstairs, finding Thomas already busy with the morning chores. He glanced at her with a small smile. "Morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." "I did," Malia replied softly, returning his smile. "Thank you again for letting me stay. I feel safe here, and it means more than I can say." Her words carried a quiet sincerity, and Thomas felt a warmth in his chest at hearing them. He had always valued independence and self-reliance, yet there was a comfort in knowing that someone had chosen to be here, to help, and to share this life with him. The morning was filled with work, as it often was. Malia helped Thomas repair a section of the barn roof that had been damaged by a recent storm. She climbed carefully, holding the shingles in place while Thomas nailed them securely. Her movements were deliberate, her hands steady, and her focus unwavering. Thomas could not help but admire her skill and determination. It was clear that she was not only capable but also deeply committed to doing things well. During a brief rest, Malia shared stories of her childhood. She spoke of her tribe, the traditions that had shaped her, and the lessons she had learned from elders. She told Thomas about the songs sung around the fire, the dances that celebrated the changing seasons, and the stories passed down through generations. Her voice was soft but filled with emotion, painting pictures of a life that was vibrant, rich, and full of meaning. Thomas listened, captivated by her words. He had known hardship in his own life, but Malia's experiences were different, tough, yet beautiful in their own way. "You've lived a remarkable life," Thomas said quietly. "Even with all you've been through, you carry such strength and wisdom. It's inspiring." Malia blushed slightly, shaking her head. "I've just done what I had to do," she said humbly. "Sometimes we survive because we must, not because we are brave." Her words struck Thomas deeply. He understood that strength was not always loud or visible. Sometimes it was quiet, steadfast, and persistent, much like Malia herself. As the days passed, the bond between them deepened. Malia's gentle presence brought a sense of peace to the ranch, while Thomas's steady nature provided her with stability she had longed for during her travels. They began to share small routines, preparing meals together, tending the animals side by side, and sometimes sitting quietly by the fire, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast night sky. These moments were simple, but they were meaningful, a silent acknowledgement of the trust and companionship that had grown between them. One afternoon, a neighboring rancher came by, curious about the newcomer at Thomas's property. He raised an eyebrow when he saw Malia, unsure of what to make of her. Thomas introduced her with a calm confidence that surprised even himself. "This is Malia," he said. "She's been helping me with the ranch, and I can't imagine managing it without her now." The neighbor looked skeptical at first, but as he watched Malia tend to the animals with care and skill, his expression softened. "Well, she seems capable," he admitted. "You're lucky to have someone like her." Thomas nodded quietly, feeling a sense of pride in the woman who had transformed his ranch and, in subtle ways, his life. Malia, for her part, continued to immerse herself in ranch life. She learned the routines, the challenges, and even the small joys that came with caring for the land and the animals. She noticed things Thomas had overlooked, suggested improvements, and offered insights that only someone with her background and experience could provide. Slowly, she began to see herself not as a visitor or a temporary guest, but as someone who belonged, someone whose presence mattered. One particularly hot afternoon, Malia and Thomas were repairing a fence when a sudden gust of wind blew across the field. Dust swirled around them and the sun beat down relentlessly. Malia paused for a moment, wiping the sweat from her brow. "We make a good team," she said with a faint smile. Thomas chuckled, adjusting a plank of wood. "Yes, we do," he replied. There was an ease in their conversation now, a natural rhythm that had developed from working side by side. The initial caution and formality had melted away, replaced by trust and camaraderie. As the evening approached, they returned to the house, exhausted but satisfied with the day's work. Dinner was simple but hearty, and as they ate, they talked about plans for the ranch, what needed repair, what could be improved, and how they could prepare for the coming seasons. Malia's suggestions were thoughtful, practical, and often insightful, reflecting the wisdom she had gained through years of experience and observation. Thomas found himself listening intently, valuing her opinions more and more with each passing day. After dinner, they sat by the fire, the warmth and glow a comforting presence in the cool night. Malia told Thomas about her travels, the towns she had passed through, and the people she had met along the way. She spoke of moments of kindness that had kept her going, and of times when she had faced danger and uncertainty. Thomas shared his own stories as well, speaking of the years he had spent alone, the struggles of managing the ranch, and the loneliness that had often accompanied him. Their stories intertwined, creating a tapestry of shared understanding and empathy. In the quiet of the evening, Thomas realized something profound. Malia had brought more than just help to his life. She had brought a sense of connection, warmth, and joy that he had long forgotten existed. She had transformed the ranch not only through her actions, but through her spirit, her courage, and her unwavering presence. And Malia, in turn, had found a place where she could rest, heal, and feel valued, not just for what she could do, but for who she was. Night fell, and the stars shone brightly over the desert. Malia lay in her bed, reflecting on the day and the changes that had come into her life. She had started as a traveler seeking shelter, uncertain of what the future held, and now she felt a sense of belonging that she had never experienced before. The ranch had become more than just a place to sleep. It had become a home, a sanctuary, and a space where trust, respect, and friendship could grow. Thomas, too, stayed awake for a while, staring into the fire. He thought about Malia and the ways she had transformed his life. He realized that kindness, courage, and the willingness to accept someone into his world had brought him something he had never expected: companionship, warmth, and a connection that went far deeper than he could have imagined. The bond between them was growing stronger, built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the most meaningful relationships are forged not through grand gestures, but through daily acts of care, trust, and presence. As sleep finally claimed them both, the ranch was quiet, filled only with the gentle sounds of the desert night, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of leaves in the wind, and the soft crackle of the fire. Inside the house, two lives that had once been separate now shared the same space, hearts quietly warming to each other. In the days to come, there would be challenges, triumphs, and moments of learning, but for now, They rested in the simple joy of having found one another, a reminder that even in a world filled with uncertainty, trust and connection could flourish when nurtured with care and kindness. Winter had arrived at the ranch. The days were shorter, and the mornings were crisp with frost that painted the fields in silvery white. Maley awoke to see a thin layer of ice covering the ground outside, sparkling in the pale sunlight. She wrapped herself in a thick blanket and stepped quietly to the window. The sight of the frozen landscape reminded her of how harsh life could be, but it also brought a sense of calm. There was something quiet and powerful about the winter desert, a reminder that even in the coldest times, beauty and strength endured. Thomas was already busy, preparing the animals for the cold day ahead. The cattle needed fresh hay, the chickens needed shelter, and the horses required extra feed. The ranch was a constant challenge, especially in winter, but Thomas had grown used to the rhythms of the land. Today, however, he had an unexpected partner in his work. Malia stepped outside, carrying a bucket of water carefully so that it would not freeze before reaching the animals. Her movements were confident, her hands steady despite the chill. Thomas watched her from a distance, a quiet appreciation growing in his heart for her resilience and dedication. Together, they worked in silence at first, letting the tasks speak for themselves. Malia's knowledge of the land became even more valuable in winter. She pointed out weaker spots in the fences where snow and wind could cause damage. She suggested extra bedding for the animals to keep them warm. She even showed Thomas how to gather certain plants that could be used as natural remedies for the cold weather. He listened carefully, realizing that her skills were not just helpful, they were essential for surviving the harsh season. During a brief break, Malia and Thomas sat on a log near the barn, sipping warm tea. The air was cold, but the sunlight offered a small measure of comfort. Malia pulled her scarf tighter around her neck and looked at Thomas. "Winter is always the hardest time for the ranch," she said softly. "But with preparation and care, it can also be a time to show resilience. Every challenge is an opportunity to learn and grow." Her words carried a quiet wisdom, and Thomas nodded thoughtfully. He had faced many winters on his own, but her presence now made even the harshest cold seem more manageable. As the day went on, the weather grew harsher. A strong wind swept across the fields, carrying snow in sharp gusts. Malia and Thomas worked tirelessly, reinforcing fences and ensuring that the animals were safe and warm. They moved together with an unspoken rhythm, anticipating each other's actions. The long hours of work, the cold, and the shared responsibility created a bond that went beyond friendship. They relied on each other not just for help, but for emotional strength. Inside the barn, as they arranged hay and blankets for the animals, Malia spoke more about her past. She told Thomas about her family, the elders who had taught her the ways of the land, and the traditions that had shaped her life. Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying sadness that she could not hide completely. Thomas listened intently, understanding that the hardships she had endured were part of what had made her the strong, capable person she was today. "You've carried a lot on your shoulders," he said gently. "And yet you still have a warmth about you that touches everyone you meet." Malia looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the soft light from the barn's lantern. "I have learned that hardship is part of life," she said quietly. "It teaches us patience, resilience, and empathy. But it also reminds us that kindness can make all the difference. You have shown me that kindness, Thomas." His heart warmed at her words. He had offered her a place to stay, but in truth, she had given him something far greater: trust, understanding, and the gentle reminder that human connection could heal wounds left by loneliness and hardship. The storm outside intensified as evening approached. Snow drifted against the windows, and the wind howled around the ranch buildings. Malia and Thomas worked together to check on every animal one last time, ensuring that each one had enough food, water, and warmth. Their hands brushed occasionally as they lifted heavy bales of hay, and each touch, though brief, carried an unspoken reassurance. By the time they returned to the house, exhausted and cold, a deep sense of satisfaction and mutual respect had settled between them. Dinner that night was a quiet affair, eaten by the warmth of the fire. Melia prepared a simple meal using ingredients from the ranch and a few herbs she had gathered, offering Thomas a taste of the flavors she remembered from her childhood. The food was hearty and comforting, warming their bodies as the storm raged outside. They ate in silence at first, each lost in thought, but gradually their conversation grew. They spoke of the challenges of the day, the lessons learned from the harsh weather, and the small victories that made all the hard work worthwhile. After dinner, they sat together by the fire, the flickering flames casting soft shadows across the room. Melia's hands were wrapped around a warm mug of tea, and Thomas found himself studying her quietly. He realized that their relationship had grown deeper, not just through shared work but through shared understanding. They had faced the storm together, cared for the animals together, and supported each other through physical and emotional challenges. In that moment, Thomas understood that the bond they shared was built on more than convenience. It was built on trust, respect, and the courage to be vulnerable with another person. Melia, too, felt the growing connection. She reflected on her journey, the long, lonely days in the desert, and the many obstacles she had faced. She had arrived at the ranch seeking shelter, unsure of what she would find, and now she had discovered a sense of belonging she had never known. Thomas had given her safety, yes, but he had also offered companionship, understanding, and a place where her presence mattered. In return, she had given him help, loyalty, and the quiet warmth of friendship. As night deepened, the storm outside continued, but inside the house, a sense of calm and security prevailed. Melia and Thomas shared stories of their pasts, memories both joyful and painful, and with each story they learned more about one another. They spoke of family, of loss, and of the dreams they still held in their hearts. Each word, each shared memory, strengthened the bond between them, reminding them that even in the coldest and most difficult times, human connection could bring warmth and light. Before retiring for the night, they checked the animals once more. Melia noticed a young calf shivering slightly in its pen and quickly adjusted the blankets to keep it warm. Thomas watched her, admiration and gratitude shining in his eyes. "You think of everything," he said softly. Melia smiled, a quiet blush coloring her cheeks. "I just try to help where I can," she replied. "We are stronger when we work together, and I care about the ranch as much as you do." Later, as they settled into their respective rooms, Melia thought about how much her life had changed in such a short time. She had come to the ranch alone, weary and uncertain, and now she felt a sense of peace she had never known. The cold outside could not reach the warmth she felt inside, a warmth that came from trust, companionship, and the knowledge that she had a place to belong. Thomas, too, reflected on the day. He realized that the woman who had arrived at his doorstep had brought more than her presence. She had brought life, energy, and a reminder of the importance of human connection. Over the next several days, the storm continued to test the ranch and its inhabitants. Snow drifted higher, winds howled stronger, and temperatures dropped lower than either of them had expected. Yet, through it all, Melia and Thomas faced each challenge together. They worked tirelessly to care for the animals, repair damaged fences, and ensure that the ranch survived the harsh winter. In these shared struggles, their trust and reliance on each other deepened, creating a bond that was strong, resilient, and unbreakable. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of work, Thomas and Melia sat quietly by the fire. The storm had passed, leaving a blanket of fresh snow over the land. They sipped their tea in comfortable silence, both exhausted yet content. Thomas looked at Melia and said softly, "I've learned a lot from you these past weeks. Not just about the ranch, but about life, about patience, kindness, and resilience. Melia's eyes met his, and she smiled gently. "And I've learned that even in the hardest times, people can make a difference for each other," she replied. "We can't control the storms, but we can face them together." That night, as they both drifted into sleep, the ranch felt alive in a way it had never been before. The storm had tested their strength, patience, and courage, but it had also revealed the depth of their connection. Melia had found a home, a sense of belonging, and a place where her presence mattered. Thomas had found a companion, someone who could share both the work and the quiet moments of life, someone who brought warmth to his heart in ways he had never expected. The winter nights were still long and cold, but inside the ranch, warmth prevailed. The fire crackled, the animals were safe and well cared for, and two hearts that had once been separate now shared a deep understanding. In facing challenges together, they had discovered that true companionship was not just about sharing comfort. It was about facing hardships, learning from them, and finding strength in each other. And as the snow fell gently outside, the ranch became a symbol of resilience, trust, and the quiet power of human connection. Spring arrived slowly at the ranch, bringing with it the soft, fragrant breeze of renewal. The snow that had covered the fields for weeks melted away, revealing the tender green shoots of grass and wildflowers beginning to bloom. The land seemed to awaken after the harsh winter, and with it, the ranch itself felt alive with possibility and hope. Melia stepped outside early one morning, taking a deep breath of the fresh air, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. She smiled softly, thinking about the long journey that had brought her here and the life that had begun to take shape in this quiet corner of the desert. Thomas was already at work in the barn, moving feed and preparing for the day's tasks. The winter storms had tested both of them, but the ranch had survived, stronger and better cared for than ever. Thomas glanced up when he saw Melia walking toward him and offered a warm smile. "Morning," he said. "Looks like spring is finally here." Melia returned his smile, feeling a quiet joy in the simple greeting. "Yes," she replied softly, "the land feels alive again." Their daily routine had become a rhythm of comfort and efficiency. Melia tended to the animals, ensuring they had fresh water and food, while Thomas focused on repairs and maintaining the barn. They worked side by side, moving in an unspoken harmony that came from weeks of shared effort. Each day, the bond between them deepened, shaped not only by work but by trust, respect, and the quiet understanding that they had found something rare and valuable in one another. As the morning progressed, they decided to plant new vegetables in the garden. Melia knelt in the soft soil, her hands working carefully as she placed seeds in neat rows. Thomas worked beside her, digging small holes and adjusting the soil. They spoke little at first, letting the rhythm of the work and the sounds of the land fill the space between them. Occasionally, Melia would look up, noticing the care Thomas took with each movement, the patience he showed not just with the land but with her as well. It was a patience that made her heart feel lighter, a presence that made her feel valued and understood. Over time, the ranch had become more than just a place to live. It was a home, a sanctuary where both of them felt seen and appreciated. Neighbors, who had once whispered about the solitary rancher and the wandering woman, now came by with curiosity and admiration. They observed how Melia moved confidently through the tasks, how she spoke with knowledge and insight about the land, and how Thomas welcomed her ideas and work with genuine appreciation. Slowly, the community began to recognize the unique bond they shared, one built on mutual respect, trust, and the quiet joys of everyday life. One afternoon, as they were tending the animals near the edge of the pasture, Melia noticed a young foal struggling to stand. She rushed over, her hands steady and gentle, supporting the animal until it found its balance. Thomas arrived moments later, helping her secure the foal and offering a word of praise. "You have a gift," he said quietly, admiration evident in his voice. Not just for caring for the land, but for caring for everything on it. Malia smiled, feeling warmth bloom in her chest. She had found a place where her skills, knowledge, and heart were valued, not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, Malia and Thomas returned to the house. They had completed a long day of work, but the satisfaction of shared effort lingered in every movement. Dinner was simple yet comforting, and afterward they sat by the fire, watching the flames flicker and listening to the soft sounds of the evening. There was a quiet contentment between them, a sense that their lives had intertwined in a way that was meaningful, enduring, and filled with mutual care. Thomas broke the silence, his voice soft and thoughtful. "You know," he said, "when you first arrived, I wasn't sure what to expect. I didn't know if I could trust anyone again, if anyone could truly belong here." Malia listened, her eyes meeting his, and waited for him to continue. "But you've changed everything," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You didn't just help with the ranch. You brought warmth, life, and a sense of hope I didn't realize I'd lost." Malia felt a lump in her throat, touched by his words. "I never expected to find this," she admitted softly. "I came here seeking shelter, and instead, I found a home and someone who sees me, not just for what I can do, but for who I am." Thomas reached across the small table, gently taking her hand in his. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of trust, respect, and a deep connection that had grown over the weeks. Over the next few weeks, the ranch continued to flourish. The garden produced tender vegetables, the animals grew healthy and strong, and the land itself seemed vibrant under their care. Each day was filled with small victories, repairing a broken fence, welcoming a new foal, preparing meals together, and sharing quiet moments by the fire. In these shared experiences, Malia and Thomas discovered that true companionship was built not on grand gestures, but on consistency, care, and the willingness to be present for one another through the ordinary moments of life. Neighbors and visitors began to notice the change as well. Where once Thomas had been seen as a solitary rancher and Malia as a wandering stranger, now they were recognized as a team, a pair whose bond was visible in the way they moved together, spoke to each other, and cared for the land and animals. Some whispered about their unusual partnership, but many admired it, seeing in their connection a reminder that trust, kindness, and respect could overcome loneliness and uncertainty. One evening, after a long day of work, Thomas and Malia sat outside on the porch, watching the sunset. The sky glowed in brilliant hues of red, orange, and purple, casting a warm light over the land. Malia rested her head on her hands, feeling the gentle breeze and listening to the quiet sounds of the ranch. Thomas joined her, sitting close but not too near, allowing a comfortable space that spoke of mutual respect and understanding. "You've changed my life," Thomas said quietly, breaking the silence. "Not just with your help here, but with your presence. You've brought warmth to a heart that I didn't realize was so cold." Malia looked at him, her eyes soft and full of emotion. "And you've changed mine," she replied. "I came here seeking shelter, but I found someone who values me, trusts me, and sees me. You've given me more than I could have imagined." Their conversation drifted into quiet reflection, sharing memories of the past and hopes for the future. They spoke of the challenges they had faced, the harsh desert, the lonely nights, the winter storms, and how each obstacle had strengthened not only the ranch but their bond. They laughed softly at small mishaps, shared stories of resilience, and found comfort in knowing that they would face whatever came next together. As night fell, the stars appeared one by one, sparkling in the clear desert sky. Malia and Thomas went inside, closing the door against the cool night air. The fire burned brightly in the hearth, casting a warm glow throughout the house. They checked on the animals one last time, ensuring that each had food, water, and warmth. The barn was secure, the fences strong, and the land ready for the new season. Finally, they returned to the warmth of the house, settling near the fire. Thomas looked at Malia, a soft smile on his face. "You didn't just warm my bed when you first arrived," he said, his voice gentle. "You warmed my heart." Malia laughed softly, a sound full of joy and relief. "And you've given me a home, a place where I belong," she replied. The room was quiet except for the crackle of the fire, but in that stillness, a profound connection was felt. A bond forged through shared struggle, mutual respect, and the quiet, consistent acts of care that had grown between them. Over the coming months, life at the ranch continued with its steady rhythm. Malia and Thomas worked together, cared for the animals, and tended the land. Yet beyond the daily chores, their connection deepened into something more profound. A companionship built on trust, understanding, and the shared knowledge that they could rely on each other through whatever life might bring. Friends and neighbors saw the transformation not just in the ranch, but in the two people who had found each other in the most unexpected way. One spring evening, as they sat together watching the sun dip below the horizon, Thomas reached for Malia's hand once more. "I am grateful," he said softly, "for every moment that brought you here. You've changed my life in ways I never expected." Malia squeezed his hand gently, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "And I am grateful for you," she replied. "For your kindness, your patience, and the warmth you've given me. We've found more than a home, we've found each other." As darkness fell, the ranch settled into quiet serenity. The fire burned low, the animals rested peacefully in their pens, and the land glowed softly under the light of the stars. Inside, two hearts, once separate and searching, now beat in harmony. The journey that had begun with uncertainty and need had blossomed into a story of trust, companionship, and love. Malia had found a place to belong, and Thomas had found a heart that warmed his own in ways he had never imagined possible. The desert night was still, filled with the gentle sounds of the land. The ranch, a symbol of resilience and care, stood strong and vibrant. And within its walls, two lives intertwined, bound by shared experience, mutual respect, and the quiet, enduring warmth of hearts that had found each other. It was a reminder that even in a world full of uncertainty, trust, kindness, and companionship could create a home, a sanctuary, and a love that would endure through all seasons, harsh or gentle.